There is a particular kind of silence that exists between two people who know too much about each other, the kind that isn't empty, right, but full. Full of unfinished sentences and stolen glances, full of things said with the eyes that the mouth refuses to form. Eli Navarro had been living inside that silence for nearly 2 years, and he had gotten very good at pretending it didn't exist. He first met Caleb Whitmore on a Tuesday in October. In the back row of a college philosophy lecture where neither of them wanted to be, Eli had been nursing a lukewarm coffee and drawing his constellations in the margins of his notebook when Caleb dropped into the seat beside him, smelling like pine soap and cold air, and whispered, "Do you actually understand what he's saying? Or are you also just nodding and hoping for the best?" Eli had laughed, an honest, surprised laugh that turned a few heads, and from that moment, something was decided between them without either of them choosing it. They became friends the way a river carves a canyon, not all at once. Not dramatically, but through the daily, patient insistence of proximity. They studied together in the campus library until the librarians turned off half the lights as a not-so-subtle hint. They shared playlists and traded recommendations for films the other had to watch immediately. They argued about everything, the ethics of artificial intelligence. Whether cereal counted as soup, Caleb said yes. Eli said Caleb needed help, the ending of every book either of them ever finished, and Eli fell in love with. Caleb, the way you fall into a deep sleep gradually, and then all at once, and by the time you realize it, it's already completely happened and there's no going back. The problem was that Caleb was the kind of person who collected friends the way some people collect records, with genuine care, with enthusiasm, with the belief that each one was irreplaceable. He introduced Eli to his other friends, his family, his childhood stories. He said things like, "You're my best friend, you know that?" with such uncomplicated warmth that Eli never knew if it was a gift or a verdict. So Eli did what felt safest. He stayed. He stayed in the warm, uncomplicated space of friendship. He buried the other thing, the tightness in his chest, when Caleb laughed. The way his attention always found Caleb in a crowded room like a compass needle finding north, and he called it gratitude. He told himself that keeping Caleb in his life, in any capacity, was better than the alternative. Better than the risk of saying something true and watching Caleb's face change. The camping trip was Caleb's idea. As most things were, just the two of us, Caleb said, leaning over the counter in Eli's apartment kitchen, stirring his coffee with more enthusiasm than was strictly necessary. 3 days, the mountains, no Wi-Fi. It'll be good for us. You've been inside your own head for weeks and I'm worried about you. Eli looked at him at the easy honesty in his face. The way concern sat on Caleb so naturally. The way he said us, and I'm worried about you, as if those two things were completely unrelated. Thought, this is exactly the problem. 3 days in a tent, Eli said carefully.
One tent?
I only have one decent tent, and yours is the one from 2015 with the broken zipper. That tent is fine, Eli. Raccoons could get into that tent.
I've
never had a raccoon incident. Yet, Caleb pointed at him with the coffee spoon. You haven't had a raccoon incident yet? Come with me. Mountains, fresh air, stars. You can bring a book. I'll bring the good snacks. And Eli, because he was apparently incapable of saying no to Caleb Whitmore when Caleb was looking at him like that, like Eli was someone worth worrying about, someone worth planning for, said yes. They left on a Friday morning. Caleb's truck packed with camping gear and a cooler full of food that Caleb had spent an embarrassing amount of time curating. Eli had offered to help plan the food, and Caleb had looked at him with genuine affection and said, I love you, but you once described a meal as adequate. So I'm good. The drive into the mountains took about 4 hours. They talked the whole way about Caleb's job search. He was finishing his graduate program in environmental science and had 3 promising interviews lined up. About Eli's work at the small nonprofit where he wrote grant proposals and felt, on good days, like he was doing something that mattered. They talked about Caleb's younger sister, Priya, who had just started high school and was terrifyingly cool, according to Caleb, who said it with a pride that softened his whole face. Eli drove the second half, and somewhere in the third hour, Caleb fell asleep in the passenger seat with his head leaning against the window and a half-eaten granola bar still in his hand. Eli turned the music down to barely a whisper and kept his eyes on the mountain road and tried not to think about how ordinary this moment was, or how much he wanted 1,000 more of them. The campsite was everything Caleb had promised, a small clearing in a dense pine forest, maybe a quarter-mile from a trail that led to a lake. The air smelled like something Eli didn't have a name for, clean and cold and alive. The kind of air that made you feel like your lungs had been doing you a disservice your whole life. They set up the tent together in a companionable argument about which pole went where, and Caleb was so wrong about the structural logic of tent assembly that Eli found himself laughing harder than he had in weeks. When the tent was finally standing correctly, Caleb spread his arms like a man who had just built a cathedral and said, "We did it." "I did it," Eli said. "You handed me things and expressed strong opinions." "Collaboration," Caleb said firmly, and clapped him on the shoulder. And Eli stepped away on the pretext of checking the tent pegs that first evening was its own kind of perfection. They cooked on a camp stove, a surprisingly decent pasta with canned tomatoes and herbs that Caleb had brought in little individual tins because presentation matters, even in the wilderness, and they ate at the edge of the clearing, watching the light change on the mountains as the sun went down. The sky turned colors that seemed almost excessive, almost too much, like the world was showing off. "Better than being inside your own head?" Caleb asked. Significantly, Eli admitted. Caleb smiled at him, and the last of the day's light caught the angle of it. And Eli looked away at the mountains. They stayed up by the fire until nearly midnight, talking about things that only come up in the dark. Their families, their fears, the versions of themselves they were still figuring out. Caleb talked about his father, who had wanted him to go into finance, and still brought it up at holiday dinners with a patience that had calcified into a specific kind of grief. Eli talked about his mother, who had died when he was 16, and how he still sometimes reached for his phone to call her when something good happened. The muscle memory of love outlasting its object. Caleb listened to that the way he always listened, with his whole body turned toward Eli, with the kind of attention that felt like a hand held in the dark. "She would have liked you," Eli said. And he meant it in a straightforward way, but the words landed between them with a small, complicated weight. "I hope so," Caleb said quietly. "I hope so." The second day was all movement, a long hike to the lake in the morning. The cold and extraordinary shock of the water when they swam in it. Lunch on a flat rock in the sun, with their feet drying, and Caleb reading aloud from a novel he'd brought, despite claiming he'd be too present for books on this trip. "You said no books?" Eli pointed out. "I said you could bring a book. I never made any promises about myself. It's technically true and deeply unfair. It was a good day. The best kind of day. The kind that exhausts you pleasantly and fills up the space in your chest that worry usually occupies." By the time they hiked back to camp as the afternoon was tipping into evening, Eli felt lighter than he had in months. The trouble started, if you could call it trouble. If you could call the thing that happened that evening anything, as simple as trouble, when Caleb's friend Marcus, called Eli, was gathering firewood at the edge of the clearing. When he heard Caleb's voice shift into a register, he recognized, careful, a little flat, the voice Caleb used when he was managing something uncomfortable. Eli didn't intend to listen. But the clearing was small, and the silence of the mountains amplified everything.
"Oh."
"I'm camping." With Eli, a pause. "Just a friend, Marcus." "My best friend." Another pause, and something in Caleb's voice that Eli couldn't quite read. Not dismissal. It's not simplicity. Something more like strain. "That's not, look, I'll call you when I'm back." "Yeah. Okay, just a friend." Eli stood at the edge of the tree line with his arms full of wood, and let those 3 words settle into him. He had known they were true. He had known it for almost 2 years. But there was a difference between knowing a thing intellectually and hearing it spoken in someone else's voice. Casual and tired. As the sun went down over the mountains and painted everything gold, he waited until his face had settled back into something neutral. And then he carried the wood to the fire pit and started building a fire with a concentration that was slightly excessive for the task. Caleb came back from the call looking somehow smaller, and dropped into his camp chair and looked at the fire materials that Eli was arranging with architectural precision. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine, just focused." Eli struck the flint. "Who was Marcus?" "Guy I've been seeing." "Sort of." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Eli had learned Minth was working something out. "It's complicated." "It doesn't have to be complicated if you don't want it to be."
Oh.
Caleb looked at him. "That's easy to say." Eli focused on the fire. A small flame caught, and he fed it carefully, the way his father had taught him. The way you always had to earn a fire, rather than simply demand it. The evening that followed had a different texture than the first. They were both a little quieter, a little more careful, moving around each other in the small geography of the campsite with a new awareness. Eli noticed every small thing, the way Caleb's hands wrapped around his mug, the long pauses before he spoke, the occasional look directed at the fire that lasted a beat too long. Dinner was quieter. The conversation found its way back eventually. Caleb was constitutionally incapable of silence for long, but it had a new undercurrent. The way a familiar song sounds different when you finally understand the lyrics. They were talking about something neither of them would later remember when Caleb said, abruptly in mid-sentence, "Can I ask you something?" "You already are," Eli said. And then, "Yes." Caleb looked at him across the fire. The flames were low and orange, and the trees were dark shapes around them, and the sky was enormous overhead, thickly scattered with stars. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Not right now, not this trip. In general, are you happy?" Eli considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Getting there," he said carefully. "Some things are unresolved, but I think I'm getting there."
What things?
Eli looked at him. At the firelight on his face, the earnest worry in his expression, the way Caleb always asked questions as if the answers genuinely mattered to him, because they did, because that was simply who Caleb was. A person for whom other people's inner lives were as real and important as his own. "It doesn't matter," Eli said. "It matters to me. Just a friend." Eli looked away at the stars. "I know," he said. "I know it does." The fire burned down around 10 o'clock, and the temperature dropped with it sharply. The way mountain nights do, as if the cold had been waiting politely behind a door and was now walking in without ceremony. They banked the coals and retreated to the tent. And Eli lay in his sleeping bag listening to the sound of the forest, which was not silence at all, but a layered, living quiet made of wind and insects and the occasional distant sound of something moving through the trees. Caleb was awake. Eli could tell by his breathing, which was too deliberate, too considered for sleep. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said to the ceiling of the tent. His voice was careful. The way you step carefully across ice you're not sure will hold you. Eli waited. When Marcus called, Caleb said, "And I said what I said about you being just a friend. I need you to know that I was." He stopped. Started again. "I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that word covers it. And I've been sitting with that for a while now. Sitting with the fact that there isn't really a word that covers it, and I think that means something." The darkness in the tent was complete and warm, and somehow easier for being dark. Eli stared at nothing and felt his heart doing something complicated in his chest. "What does it mean?" he asked, and his voice was steadier than he expected. Another long pause. The forest spoke quietly around them. "I think it means that I've been using the word friend because it felt safe," Caleb said. "Because the alternative was scarier. Because you are," he stopped, exhaled, "because you are the most important person in my life, Eli. And the thought of saying anything that might change that was terrifying. Is terrifying. I'm currently terrified, Caleb. I'm not finished." You could hear Caleb breathing. "I'm not finished because I've been not saying this for so long that I need to actually say it, even if it comes out badly. I look for you in every room. Did you know that? When I walk into a space, I look for you first. Not consciously, it just happens. And when something good happens to me, or something terrible, you're the first person I want to tell. And I've been calling that friendship for almost 2 years because that's what I could call it without risking everything. But tonight, listening to myself say those words to Marcus. Just a friend. Just a friend. I felt sick. Because it was wrong. It was the wrongest thing I've said in a long time. The silence that followed was the most significant silence Eli had ever inhabited. You could have told me this, Eli said finally. I wasn't sure if Caleb. He turned on his side, though he couldn't see anything in the dark. I have been in love with you for almost 2 years. The quality of the silence changed completely. What Caleb said? Not a question, I know. I've been terrified too. Eli let out a long breath, and with it, something that had been compressed in his chest for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I've been so afraid of losing you that I kept choosing not to have you, which is its own kind of loss, really. Just slower, Eli. Caleb's voice was very quiet. I know, Eli. Why didn't you? A beat too, and then, in the complete dark of the tent, with the mountains around them and the stars beyond, Caleb laughed, a brief, stunned, completely unguarded laugh. That was the most honest sound Eli had ever heard. Fair, Caleb said. That's entirely fair. We're idiots, Eli said. Enormous idiots. And he could hear the smile in it. Almost 2 years. Almost 2 years. We wasted almost 2 years. We didn't waste them, Eli said, and he meant it. We just took the long way. Another silence. But this one was made of entirely different material. This one was new and warm and full of possibility rather than restraint. I'm still terrified, Caleb said softly. Me too, but in a different way now, Eli agreed. In a much better way? He heard Caleb shift in his sleeping bag, felt the small seismic event of that movement in the shared air of the tent. When Caleb spoke again, he was closer. Is it okay if I? Yes, Eli said, before Caleb could finish. Because some questions don't need their endings. In the dark, Caleb found his hand. Just that, his fingers finding Eli's in the small warm space between their sleeping bags. His thumb moving once across Eli's knuckles as if to confirm the reality of him. And Eli held on, and the whole enormous dark world pressed close around them and felt. For the first time in a very long time, like exactly the right size, morning arrived the way mountain mornings do suddenly. Fully, with a completeness of light that felt almost argumentative, as if the day was making a point. Eli lay in the gray-gold glow of the tent fabric and felt the unfamiliar warmth of another person's presence and thought, oh, this is what it feels like when things are true. Caleb was already awake. He was lying on his back with one arm behind his head. And when he noticed Eli's eyes open, he turned to look at him. And his expression was the kind that people spend their whole lives looking for. Open and present. And not performing anything at all. Good morning, Caleb said. Good morning, Eli said. A pause, and then Caleb said, slightly wonderingly, last night actually happened. It actually happened. We're not going to wake up and be weird about it? Are you going to be weird about it? Caleb considered this with apparent seriousness. No, he concluded. I really don't think I am. I think I'm going to be the opposite of weird about it, whatever that is. Normal, Eli offered. Normal. Yes. I'm going to be extremely normal, he smiled. I've been wanting this for so long that it almost doesn't feel real. Is that strange? Not to me, Eli said. They lay there in the morning light for a while longer than was strictly necessary to be awake. And neither of them spoke very much, and neither of them felt the need to. There is an ease that exists between two people who have known each other long enough that the new things have familiar roots when the vulnerability of honesty lands. It's not in strange territory, but in known ground. Fertilizing something that was already reaching toward light. Eventually, because the world is persistent, and mornings are persistent, and neither Eli's stomach nor Caleb's internal alarm clock had any interest in sentiment. They got up and made coffee and breakfast in the clean cold of the mountain morning. Caleb made the coffee and Eli made the eggs, and they stood in the small kitchen of their temporary world, working around each other with the unconscious coordination of people who have learned each other's rhythms. And now, the air between them was different. Not full of held breath and careful navigation, but simply full. In the way a room is full when it's genuinely lived in. I should have said something a long time ago, Caleb said, watching the coffee percolate. I keep thinking about all the conversations we had and wondering how many of them were trying to be this conversation. Probably most of them, Eli said. All the things I was almost saying.
I know.
I was almost saying them too. Eli divided the eggs onto 2 plates with an attention to equality that was a little excessive. But I don't think we were ready before. I think you have to build up to this kind of honesty. I think it takes time. Caleb took the coffee off the camp stove and poured 2 cups and handed Eli his, the way he always did. Already knowing how Eli took it, the gesture so practiced it was automatic, and looked at him. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Right now. Not in general." Right now? Eli looked at the mountains, golden in the morning, ancient and completely indifferent and beautiful. He looked at the coffee in his hand, and the steam rising from it, and the simple, improbable, particular fact of this moment. "Yes," he said. "I really am."